Simon Smale. I'm going to talk a little bit about the colonic microbiome in the context of irritable bowel syndrome. There will be other talks talking about the wider context of the colonic microbiome when we get to that topic, as it were. So the colonic microbiome is essentially a descriptive term used to define the bugs that live in our guts. And I say it's colonic because most of the bugs that live in our guts are in the large bowel, otherwise known as the colon. There are approximately 10 trillion organisms living in our large bowel. And if you take a milliliter of colonic fluid, you'll get approximately 10 billion or so bugs. Whereas if you go to any other part of the bowel, you get far fewer, perhaps only 100 or 1,000 bugs per milliliter, depending on which part of the small bowel you sample. So, what of the colonic microbiome? Well, you acquire it going through childhood, and it has a huge influence, early childhood really, in the first year of life. It has a huge influence on the neural development of both the gut and the central nervous system. It may increase or attenuate visceral sensitivity in adult life. In other words, increase or decrease. Attenuate means feel less, obviously. It may increase or decrease the leakiness of the gut and the tendency of the gut to respond to inflammatory stimuli. It can also influence behaviour and modify our response to stress. So there are now commercially available probiotics which have been demonstrated to influence the resilience of both people with anxiety and elite athletes. Remarkable, really. So, looking at people with irritable bowel syndrome, it's clear that the microbiomes of people with irritable bowel syndrome seem to be somewhat different, and different studies demonstrate different things. I won't go into the detail of all this, but you can see from the slide there are a number of changes that have been noted. Now, it can go wrong at a number of points in life. So if you have early life changes, that may influence it, as may changes in adolescence, recent life events, things that disturb our sleep, stress, and indeed inflammation such as gut infection. But of course, diet and lifestyle can also, to an extent, influence our gut microbiome and thence the way we feel and behave. So in childhood, in short, gastrointestinal microbiome has a profound influence on early brain development. So there's evidence from mammal studies, and we are mammals, that demonstrate that maternal diet can influence the behaviour of the mother's offspring, particularly obviously when they're breastfeeding, and that you can correct some of the subsequent behaviours in the offspring. We tend to develop kind of socialisation difficulties by then correcting the bacterial deficits, usually by feeding them stools from either happy rats or happy humans or other happy mammals. And we know in people with irritable bowel syndrome that early deprivation can influence the microbiome, and we recognise that early deprivation is associated with more severe irritable bowel syndrome in those people who are susceptible. Changes in the central nervous system function appear to arise as a result of the microbial products. So whatever the bugs are producing gets to the brain and influences the development of the cells that support nervous development, so the glial cells and the astrocytes. And as I've already mentioned, it's also clear that certain strains of bacteria may influence behaviour. So in adolescence, there are lots of life events, and adolescents are meant to be kind of doing risky things because that's what adolescence is all about. But those things may influence the development of the microbiome, and of course they are influencing the development of the microbiome. So it's a hand and glove, key and lock kind of hypothesis. Similarly, the here and now psychological stressors can influence the microbiome. So sleep deprivation, exercise, and stress in day-to-day life all influence those things. Diet and lifestyle, another important factor, can influence the bugs. They don't influence the totality of the bugs you get, but they really influence the proportions of the bugs in your gut. So you might have the same bugs but in different proportions, depending on whether you eat 30 vegetables a month or whether you subsist on the food served at certain fast food chains, not wishing to mention any names. Similarly, stresses such as going off to university, getting a job, getting married, getting divorced, retirement, bereavement can all cause changes in the microbiome. And so in conclusion, irritable bowel syndrome reflects the symptoms that people develop when the complex interactions between brain, the gut, and the gut's nervous system and the microbiome are disrupted. And we've already touched on what symptoms those are: abdominal pain, bloating, and constipation, along with a host of other associated symptoms. And this may be driven by a number of factors, including early life and how we were exposed to things both in our genetics and in our microbiome, and in the way we developed psychologically as a result of our environment, adolescent experience, adult life stresses, and gut inflammation, such as infection or inflammatory bowel disease for some. Diet also plays an influence. And the management of irritable bowel syndrome, which I'm going to move on to next, involves often addressing more than one of these things. So I'll go on in the next video to talk about strategies for managing IBS, and then we'll break that down into different aspects. Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening.